Black woman mocked by cop in court, but the billionaire judge's verdict stuns him. It began with the subtle hush of a crowded courtroom, a place meant for justice but often tinged with everyday prejudice. Lena Price, a resolute black woman, stood at the defendant's table, her shoulders stiff under the eyes of a cop who'd made a cruel joke at her expense. Everyone heard it, including the presiding judge, Harriet Carter, an eccentric billionaire whose name carried both reverence and mystery. No one dared guess what would happen when Lena's side of the story surfaced, or how Judge Carter's verdict would shake the courtroom. But beneath the veneer of routine proceedings lurked a quiet storm, ready to explode. For Lena Price, life had always been about careful balances. She'd grown up in a modest Chicago neighborhood, neighbors helping neighbors, scraping by on tight budgets, always wary of the police who patrolled with a suspicious eye. Yet Lena, steadfast in her ambition, dreamed of becoming a teacher. She pushed through college on scholarships and part-time jobs. By her late 20s, she taught English at a struggling high school, funneling her love of words into shaping the next generation. On a crisp autumn afternoon, while out running errands, her path crossed with Officer Garrity. The intersection seemed like any other: busy sidewalks, rushing pedestrians, city bustle. Garrity, fresh off a shift, was at a coffee shop counter. Lena stepped up behind him to order. He scowled at her, glancing at her hair, a beautiful set of tight braids, before pivoting away with a dismissive air. Lena sensed hostility but ignored it, trying to focus on her daily tasks. Moments later, outside the shop, Garrity confronted her, claiming she'd bumped into him and neglected to apologize. His tone dripped with accusation. Taken aback, Lena recalled no such incident. She calmly apologized if they brushed past each other in the crowd. Garrity's glare suggested that wasn't enough. He wanted a confrontation. Alarmed by his aggression, she tried to walk away, but Garrity insisted she was acting suspicious. He demanded to see her ID. Rattled, Lena complied, hoping to defuse the situation. But it escalated. Garrity claimed her name was on a watch list. She'd never heard anything so absurd. He radioed in for backup, leading to an uncomfortable standoff on the sidewalk. Passers-by slowed, uncertain. Lena stood in shock, forced to wait while Garrity acted as though he'd cornered a dangerous criminal. When backup arrived, it became clear Garrity had no real cause. Another officer apologized to Lena, but Garrity refused to let it go, scribbling up a minor citation for disturbing the peace. The official grounds? She'd allegedly shouted and disrupted his rightful duties. Lena left shaken, her mind spinning with disbelief. She'd done nothing, yet the power dynamic left her powerless, pinned by the dreaded question, what if he's done this before? She tried to return to normal life, ignoring the dreadful incident, but 3 days later a court summons arrived, stating she must appear to answer to Garrity's citation. The charge: obstruction of a law enforcement officer. If convicted, it could tarnish her record, even jeopardizing her teaching job. Horror and anger clashed in her chest. She had no resources for a lawyer, no ties to high-level influence. She confided in close friends who urged her to seek pro bono help. Little did she know the judge assigned to her case was none other than Harriet Carter. Carter was rumored to be one of the wealthiest women in the Midwest, her fortune traced to an old family empire and savvy investments with Morgan Stanley. She rarely appeared in the society pages, preferring anonymity. But those who interacted with her in the courtroom described her as unpredictable, sometimes austere, sometimes brimming with compassion. Whispers floated that Carter donated lavishly to social causes and had an unyielding stance on fairness. Lena, naive to these details, only recognized the name from local rumors. In the weeks leading up to her court date, Lena sank into dread. Garrity's mocking grin haunted her memories, his smug assumption that a black woman had no recourse against an officer's word. Her principal tried to console her, yet quietly worried about the school's reputation if Lena's name hit the news. Each day, Lena taught Shakespeare and Baldwin to her students, wearing a forced smile. Inside, she felt the creeping fear that justice might slip away from her, overshadowed by a policeman's authority. As the court date neared, word of her predicament spread among her colleagues. A kindly staff attorney friend at the teachers' union offered minimal advice, but resources were tight. She prepared to face the bench alone, hoping the truth might suffice. Meanwhile, rumors about Judge Harriet Carter circulated. Some said she was bored with petty cases, others claimed she read every detail meticulously. None gave Lena clarity on what to expect. She only prayed that the judge would see the truth beyond Garrity's uniform. In a city layered with unspoken biases, where a policeman's testimony often outweighed a citizen's voice, Lena braced herself for a harsh lesson in reality. She imagined Garrity's triumphant sneer, picturing him telling the court how disorderly she'd been. Yet destiny had other plans, destiny shaped, in part, by a billionaire judge's hidden empathy. If Garrity believed this to be a routine hearing with guaranteed success, he was in for a rude awakening. The stage was set for a drama that would unravel the illusions of power and prejudice, changing Lena's life and Garrity's for good. The morning of Lena's hearing dawned chilly and grey, matching her unsettled nerves. She took the subway to the city's central courthouse, a towering limestone edifice embodying authority. Clutching her worn briefcase, she forced composure as she climbed the wide marble steps. She wore her best professional suit, hoping it projected seriousness. Inwardly, she felt small, overshadowed by the labyrinth of the justice system. Inside, corridors bustled with attorneys, defendants, and uniformed officers. The cacophony unsettled her. She'd never faced criminal charges, never even set foot in a traffic court. Every sign reading Courtroom A, Courtroom B teased her disorientation. She finally found the correct space. Department 4, presided over by Judge Harriet Carter. She lingered outside, a swirl of anxiety in her stomach. A kind security guard pointed out where to wait. As she sat on a stiff bench, she glimpsed Officer Garrity across the hallway, laughing with a fellow cop. Their eyes met. His grin turned menacing. For a moment, he lifted an invisible coffee cup in mock salute, evidently mocking the day they first met. Lena swallowed hard. He's so sure he'll win, she realized. The power of the badge, the likely trust court's place in an officer's word, it all weighed on her like a suffocating cloak. At 9 sharp, the bailiff opened the courtroom doors. People filed in. Some were lawyers, some were defendants, some families. Garrity strutted inside, uniform pressed, exuding confidence. Lena mustered courage, following. The space beyond was austere. Wooden pews for observers, a raised bench where the judge would sit, tables for prosecution and defense. But there was no typical dais. Instead, a large modern chair loomed behind a polished desk, flanked by tall windows letting in natural light. A hush spread as an attendant announced, "All rise for the Honorable Harriet Carter." Everyone stood, breath catching in that moment of formal gravity. Judge Harriet Carter entered briskly. She was tall, with graying hair pinned in a sophisticated updo. She wore the usual black robes, but something about her exuded an aura of quiet wealth, from the understated diamond pin on her collar to the regal posture she held. Though she rarely flaunted her fortune, the rumor was that Carter's personal net worth surpassed that of many corporate titans. A singular hush enveloped the room. Even the staff recognized her fierce intellect and unpredictable rulings. Lena's heart pounded. She sensed Carter's sharp gaze sweeping the gallery, as if evaluating each person's character in a single glance. The clerk read the docket items. One by one, minor matters were addressed swiftly: traffic tickets, small disputes. Then the clerk intoned, "Case number 2025-3, People versus Lena Price, charge obstruction of a law enforcement officer." Lena rose, stepping forward. Garrity moved to the prosecution side, or rather the witness stand area, as the state had assigned a junior prosecutor to represent his allegations. Carter studied Lena a moment, then turned to the prosecutor. "Ms. Price, do you have counsel?" the judge asked. voice even but resonating with authority. Lena swallowed. "No, Your Honor. I can't afford a private lawyer. I requested public defense, but my assigned attorney had an emergency and I was told to proceed." Her cheeks warmed in embarrassment. Judge Carter's brow creased slightly. "Very well. If you wish to proceed pro se, we can do so, but do you feel prepared?" Lena's heart hammered. She nodded hesitantly. "I have no choice." "I'll try my best, Your Honor." The hearing commenced. The prosecutor offered an opening statement, painting Garrity as a dedicated officer who merely attempted to investigate suspicious behavior. He alleged Lena became hostile, raised her voice in a public space, causing alarm. The words stung Lena. None reflected reality. Then Garrity testified. He wore a mask of self-assured righteousness, describing how he spotted Lena lurking behind him, how she invaded his personal space. He feigned professional courtesy, claiming he politely asked for ID, but she became verbally aggressive. He spewed phrases like "fear for my safety" and "uncooperative subject." Lena clenched her fists, trying not to glare. She suspected the entire tale was carefully crafted. The junior prosecutor asked leading questions, reinforcing Garrity's narrative. "So you believed Ms. Price might be part of a pickpocket ring?" Garrity nodded gravely. It was a possibility. Finally, Carter turned to Lena. "Ms. Price, your cross-examination?" A swirl of fear overcame her. She gathered her wits, stepping forward. She'd never cross-examined anyone, but she had to try. She started by questioning the details. Why hadn't Garrity radioed in a pickpocket suspicion earlier? Why didn't backup see any sign of wrongdoing? Garrity mumbled about split-second decisions. She pressed further. Did he have prior calls about her specifically? No. Did passers-by confirm her alleged aggression? No. Each question chipped at his story. Carter watched intently, hands folded, occasionally nodding as Lena revealed inconsistencies. Then Lena testified on her own behalf, recounting each moment from ordering coffee to Garrity's abrupt confrontation. She insisted she never raised her voice except to protest being forcibly detained. She described how backup officers seemed confused by Garrity's actions, leading to an uneasy release. She concluded with a note on her personal background: a teacher, no criminal record, no motive to disrupt the peace. Something flickered in Judge Carter's expression. Recognition, perhaps empathy. The prosecutor tried to cast doubt, pointing out minor discrepancies in her recollection of time. But to Carter, the crux of the matter seemed straightforward. Did Garrity truly have reason to suspect Lena, or was it an abuse of authority? Still, nothing in Carter's demeanor betrayed her final stance. She maintained an impassive face. The hearing advanced to closing statements. Garrity smirked, evidently confident that an officer's testimony typically outweighed a civilian's. He glanced across the gallery, as though seeking approval from other uniformed colleagues. At the hearing's end, Judge Carter announced she would review the evidence thoroughly before giving her verdict. She set a date for final ruling, about a week away. Lena's heart sank. She'd have to endure more days of uncertainty. As the session ended, Carter rose gracefully, leaving the bench. The bailiff dismissed the court. Garrity flashed Lena a triumphant grin, whispering, "Told you you'd regret messing with the law," before striding out. Lena felt hollow, uncertain whether Carter saw the truth. She returned home, mind flooded with doubts. What if an officer's word is enough to convict me? Would Carter's rumored sense of justice help me? Or would wealth and power remain distant from my plight? Behind the scenes, however, Judge Harriet Carter had begun her own investigation, unsatisfied with Garrity's glib testimony. The billionaire judge had resources beyond typical jurists, from private investigators to philanthropic networks. If Garrity believed his uniform guaranteed unquestioned credibility, he was about to discover that Carter's net worth wasn't just a number. It was a silent powerhouse fueling her pursuit of genuine justice. The stage was set for an explosive conclusion that would redefine the lines between authority, race, and the power of truth. Behind the solemn facade of her stately judicial chambers, Judge Harriet Carter sipped tea and reread transcripts of Garrity and Lena's testimonies. Her instincts, honed from years on the bench, nagged at her. Something about Garrity's story reeked of contrivance, a laundry list of suspicious buzzwords, no actual evidence. She found herself recalling her own experiences as a black woman, albeit one cloaked in wealth and social standing. She dealt with subtle slights, masked politeness from those who either feared her power or resented her success. Could Garrity have targeted Lena for reasons that had nothing to do with genuine suspicion? She set down her teacup, scanning her private phone. Harriet Carter might have billions, but rarely flaunted them. She used her resources in philanthropy, quiet investments, and a discreet network that helped her gather crucial facts. Now that network would serve a new purpose. She tapped a few contacts: a retired police captain who owed her a favor, a local reporter from the Chicago Tribune who had once cooperated with her foundation. Carter politely requested any background intel on Officer Garrity, past complaints, disciplinary records, rumored patterns of harassment. While official channels might keep such records hidden, Carter's name opened doors. Within 2 days, she received discreet updates. Garrity had faced 2 prior accusations of racial profiling, both settled quietly with no departmental action. Another complaint alleged he used excessive force on a Latino man, but Internal Affairs had closed the case due to lack of corroborating witnesses. Harriet found no conclusive smoking gun, but enough hints to suspect a pattern. She then scoured legal archives, pulling Garrity's old court appearances. She noticed a pattern. In minor infractions or disorderly conduct charges brought by Garrity, the defendants were overwhelmingly people of color. Often they lacked the means to fight back, leading to plea bargains or fines. Carter's lips pressed thin. This was bigger than a single confrontation. Quietly, Carter tapped her philanthropic ally, Jessica O'Brien, from the Morgan Stanley Philanthropic Desk, a real institution as requested. She asked O'Brien for input on potential pro bono counsel that might help gather statements from Garrity's old victims. The idea was risky for a sitting judge, blurring lines between judicial impartiality and activism. But Harriet believed justice demanded a bit of extra push, especially when systemic bias thrived behind closed doors. Her phone chimed, a text from the retired police captain reading, "Your suspicion was right. Garrity's disliked in the precinct, known for targeting minorities, hard to prove. Good luck." Carter exhaled. She couldn't present these off-record findings in open court. She must remain neutral, yet it confirmed her intuition that Garrity might be weaving a false narrative. As the final hearing day approached, Harriet Carter weighed how to proceed. She needed to remain within legal parameters, but also ensure Garrity's wrongdoing was exposed. She drafted her opinions carefully, preparing potential lines of questioning if new evidence arose in the next hearing. She also considered the possibility of summoning additional witnesses. Typically, a judge's role was reactive, not investigative. But if the pursuit of truth required it, she'd find a procedural path. Meanwhile, Lena endured a tumultuous week. She returned to teaching, trying to focus on lesson plans about African American literature. She found it ironically fitting that her classes on the civil rights movement paralleled her personal fight for dignity. Some older students noticed her tension. She tried to keep calm, but the possibility of a guilty verdict gnawed at her. What if the judge believed Garrity? She had no idea of Harriet Carter's behind-the-scenes efforts. Officer Garrity, for his part, remained smug. He boasted to colleagues that the lady judge won't do squat, bragging about his airtight case. With typical scorn, he told a fellow cop that these types always cry racism when they can't behave. He fully expected Carter to side with him, or at worst, impose a mild penalty on Lena, perhaps a fine or mandatory classes. Cops rarely lost in these skirmishes over petty citations. The day before the final hearing, rumors circulated at the courthouse that Judge Carter had requested additional documents from Garrity's precinct. No one knew why. Garrity snorted, suspecting it was standard procedure, but an uneasy prickle started in his gut. What if the judge is digging deeper? He dismissed the thought. Judges rarely meddled so far. As the hearing approached, Harriet Carter finalized her plan. She would conduct the session meticulously, allowing Garrity and Lena to present any last arguments. But she had prepared an unusual set of questions aimed at Garrity. She'd do it lawfully, under the guise of clarifying his testimony. If Garrity lied or stumbled, it might unravel his entire story. And if everything aligned, Carter would deliver a verdict that not only addressed Lena's innocence, but also cast a broader spotlight on Garrity's pattern of abuse. The policeman who so cavalierly sneered at a nobody black woman might soon face the shock of his career. On the morning of the final hearing, tensions were palpable in the courtroom. Word had spread that Judge Carter might not deliver a routine verdict. The gallery was more crowded than before, local reporters hoping for a scoop, curious onlookers who'd heard rumors about Harriet Carter's unpredictable style. Lena arrived early, her face drawn with worry, but she forced a polite nod to a supportive colleague from her school who showed up in solidarity. Garrity arrived in uniform, flanked by a couple of fellow officers. He projected an air of unwavering confidence, strolling to the prosecution side. The junior prosecutor looked slightly uneasy. He'd heard rumors Carter had made special inquiries, but Garrity patted his shoulder, muttering, "Relax. This judge can't overshadow the facts." When the bailiff announced Harriet Carter's entry, a hush settled. The judge swept in, her gaze flicking over the audience. As she seated herself, her eyes momentarily rested on Garrity, an intensity in her expression that made him squirm internally. She gavelled the hearing to order, recapping the case. Lena Price, standing accused of obstructing an officer, Officer Garrity, the primary witness. The prosecutor repeated his standard lines. Garrity acted in good faith, suspecting potential criminal behavior. Meanwhile, Lena quietly reiterated her side, a teacher with no record, confronted without cause. Harriet Carter nodded, letting them speak. But once opening statements concluded, Carter cleared her throat. "Before I finalize this matter, I have additional questions for Officer Garrity. Please step to the stand." A flicker of confusion crossed Garrity's face. Typically, the judge's questions would be brief or non-existent at this stage, but Harriet Carter's tone brooked no refusal. He rose, adjusting his uniform collar, approaching the witness box. The bailiff swore him in again. He cast a cocky glance at his fellow officers as if to say, "Watch me handle this." Then he faced Carter. The judge, in a calm voice, asked about Garrity's prior knowledge of any pickpocket ring that day. He offered vague references to rumors and dispatch calls. Carter pressed for specifics. Which dispatch log? Garrity hesitated, admitting none were officially recorded. Carter's eyes narrowed. She moved on. "You claimed Miss..." Price raised her voice in a public disturbance. "Did you gather statements from bystanders?" Garrity stammered. "It wasn't needed. My observations sufficed." Carter's next queries took an even sharper edge. "Officer, have you filed similar minor charges in the last year? Under what circumstances?" Garrity's brow knotted. "Why is that relevant, Your Honor?" She replied evenly, "I determine relevance here, officer. Answer." He reluctantly admitted he'd filed multiple disorderly or obstruction charges, mostly in small conflicts with individuals of color. He insisted it was coincidence. Tension rippled. The gallery whispered. The junior prosecutor rubbed his temple nervously. Carter flipped through some notes. "According to departmental records, you lodged at least 6 such charges. 5 ended in quick guilty pleas or dismissals. Is that correct?" Garrity mumbled, "Yes, because they were valid." Emboldened, Harriet Carter followed up. "I see. Could you describe each scenario? In summary, of course." Garrity's face reddened. The stories he provided were threadbare, loaded with language about suspicious behavior, but never any real evidence. It became glaringly obvious to many in the room that Garrity employed a pattern of intimidation. The junior prosecutor fidgeted, recognizing the case unraveling. In a final blow, Carter produced a printout. "We have a statement from a certain Mr. Reyes, who alleged you harassed him last November on similarly vague grounds. He never pressed charges. But do you recall that encounter?" Garrity's eyes widened. I don't remember." Carter's gaze sharpened. "This statement suggests a consistent approach. You singled him out, used potential threat language, then ended with a trifling citation. Are you certain Ms. Price's case isn't part of the same pattern?" A hush blanketed the courtroom. Garrity glared at the judge, frustration boiling. In a snap, he blurted, "Your Honor, you're just siding with her to look politically correct. She's playing the race card and you're falling for it." The insult, leveled at the bench, jolted everyone. A collective gasp rose from the gallery. Even the junior prosecutor looked aghast. Harriet Carter's face went cold, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "Officer Garrity, that outburst is contemptuous. I suggest you compose yourself before you dig your own grave further." Garrity realized too late he'd gone too far. Embarrassed, he tried to backtrack, muttering about "no disrespect intended," but the damage was done. Harriet Carter's fierce gaze pinned him in place, as if dissecting every lie he'd told. Lena watched from her seat, heart pounding. She couldn't believe Garrity had the gall to lash out at the judge. The policeman's arrogance might have just sealed his fate. The judge calmly dismissed Garrity from the stand. She turned to the prosecutor, who had no further witnesses. Then she addressed Lena. "Ms. Price, do you wish to add anything else?" Startled by the chance, Lena softly reaffirmed her innocence, stating she respected honest policing but wouldn't accept baseless intimidation. With that, Harriet Carter adjourned the hearing. "I will render my verdict shortly," she said. "Court is in recess for an hour." She swept out, leaving Garrity fuming. The gallery erupted into hushed chatter. Observers buzzed about Carter's pointed questioning. The policeman's meltdown suggested the final blow would not favor him. Some even speculated the judge might mete out an unprecedented judgment. Lena stepped outside to breathe. She found the crisp air bracing, her knees weak from adrenaline. A teachers' union friend offered a supportive hug, whispering, "She's onto him, Lena. I can feel it." Garrity, for his part, stewed in a corner, a few officers patting his shoulder, but they looked uneasy. The final showdown approached. Harriet Carter's incisive inquiries had laid bare Garrity's repeated pattern of hollow charges, and after his brazen outburst, any veneer of respectable policing had shattered. Soon the court would reconvene, and Harriet Carter's next words would reverberate far beyond this case, delivering a karmic strike that left Garrity and the city stunned. An hour later, the bailiff recalled everyone to courtroom 4. Tension soared. People sensed this was no ordinary misdemeanor judgment. Lena slipped onto her seat, her palms clammy. Officer Garrity sat stiffly at the prosecution table, arms folded. Harriet Carter re-entered with the same measured dignity, but a certain gleam in her eye suggested resolution. She wasted no time. "After reviewing the testimony and evidence, I find the following. 1. Mrs. Price's alleged obstruction lacks credible basis. The officer's version contradicts the timeline, lacks external verification, and is undermined by his repeated reliance on suspicion without substance. Mrs. Price's calm, consistent account, corroborated by the absence of any dispatch calls or bystander complaints, leads me to dismiss this charge entirely." At that, Lena nearly collapsed with relief. She fought tears, hearing a smattering of applause from the gallery. Garrity's face contorted. Harriet Carter raised a hand for silence, continuing, 2. In light of the officer's outburst in this courtroom, plus the pattern gleaned from his past minor charges, I'm compelled to address possible misconduct. While I cannot unilaterally impose departmental sanctions, I strongly recommend the district's Internal Affairs Division conduct a thorough review of Officer Garrity's record. If further evidence supports racial profiling or repeated baseless citations, the department must take disciplinary action. A hush followed. Garrity glowered, but Harriet Carter wasn't finished. She exhaled slowly, then delivered a final blow. 3. In this rare instance, I'm invoking an old but valid option in our city's penal code, compensatory sanctions for malicious prosecution, requiring the offending party to reimburse the defendant's legal fees and lost wages. Mrs. Price had to prepare her own defense and endured mental distress. Therefore, I order Officer Garrity to personally pay Ms. Price a sum of $5,000 in punitive compensation for the harm caused by this frivolous, racially motivated charge. The gallery gasped. The bailiff blinked in astonishment. Even the junior prosecutor looked stunned. This was a seldom invoked measure, typically requiring extraordinary circumstances. Harriet Carter had found them: Garrity's pattern, his meltdown in court, and the blatant mismatch of evidence. For an officer to be personally liable was practically unheard of. Garrity leapt up, shouting, "That's impossible!" "You can't do that." Carter fixed him with a withering stare. "I can, Officer Garrity. The law invests me with certain powers. Your contempt for the truth, your public insult to this court, and the probable pattern of your actions justify an extraordinary remedy." She banged the gavel. "Any further disruption, you'll face contempt of court. This hearing is concluded. Ms. Price is free of all charges and stands vindicated." Pandemonium erupted. The bailiff motioned for quiet as Harriet Carter rose and swept out. Reporters raced to file updates, some already tweeting, "Billionaire judge slams cop with personal fine for racial profiling." The phrase punitive compensation soared across social media. Garrity, incensed, tried ranting about appealing. However, the union reps who had come to watch looked torn. Defending Garrity might overshadow them with negative PR. Meanwhile, Lena felt numb, tears streaming as a swirl of relief, shock, and gratitude overcame her. Outside, cameras converged. Microphones thrust forward for Lena's reaction. She stammered, "I'm overwhelmed, but grateful. Judge Carter saw the truth. This was never about me winning money. It's about fairness. I hope this leads to real accountability." She glimpsed Garrity skulking away, ignoring reporters. The policeman's bravado had evaporated. She felt a pang, remembering how fearsome he seemed at the coffee shop. Now he slouched under the condemnation of a judge who refused to let prejudice hide behind a badge. A roar of conversation flooded the courthouse steps. Some bystanders cheered Lena's name, chanting, "Justice for all." She recognized a few from her teacher friend circle. Emma Martin, a well-known local activist, approached, hugging Lena, praising her for standing strong. "This sets a precedent," Emma said. "Finally, a judge who calls out racist policing." A wave of relief and disbelief coursed through Lena. The possibility of losing her job or facing jail vanished. Instead, the entire city buzzed about Harriet Carter's stunning verdict. Whispers about the billionaire judge soared. Some lauded her moral courage, others questioned the punitive measure. But the law was on Carter's side. The code allowed for personal fines in malicious or bad faith prosecutions, rarely used, but valid if the judge deemed it necessary. Within hours, talk radio hosts debated the ramifications. Some said it was about time cops faced personal liability for misconduct. Others howled that this would hamper policing, but the story overshadowed every other local headline. Even national outlets took notice. Judge Harriet Carter's rare move: officer fined for racial profiling. Judge Carter, the justice for Lena, and no badge immunity trended online. Meanwhile, Harriet Carter herself retreated to chambers, ignoring reporters. She kept her stoic composure, but those close to her knew she was satisfied with the outcome. She'd used her platform to deliver a strong message. The law must protect everyone equally, and officers can't hide behind uniforms if they act in bad faith. That evening, Lena returned home, dazed. Her phone rang incessantly. Well-wishers, media requests. She turned them off to sit quietly, trying to process. She gazed at the small check from her job, overshadowed by the knowledge that Garrity must pay $5,000 for damages. She didn't relish that money. It felt symbolic. She resolved to donate part of it to a legal fund supporting others in similar battles. That, she decided, would reflect the spirit of Harriet Carter's verdict. As the city reeled from the shock, Officer Garrity licked his wounds. He faced departmental scrutiny, possible demotion or termination. The union weighed whether to spend resources on an appeal. The entire fiasco signaled a shift. If you cross certain lines, even an officer might pay dearly. Hard karma, indeed. Garrity once mocked Lena, expecting the court to side with him. Instead, a black-robed billionaire judge had shattered that assumption with a single clang of her gavel. The impact of Judge Harriet Carter's verdict radiated far beyond Lena Price's personal victory. Over the following weeks, local media churned out editorials debating the case's implications. One commentator penned an op-ed titled, "When a Single Ruling Rewrites Our Understanding of Policing." Another cheered, "Judge Carter, the billionaire we didn't know we needed." Meanwhile, Harriet Carter herself remained out of the spotlight. She declined interview requests, continuing her judicial duties. However, rumors grew that her philanthropic arm, the Carter Foundation, was working on a community-based policing initiative. The foundation quietly funneled grants to legal aid clinics that specialized in cases of police misconduct. This bolstered suspicion that Carter's ruling wasn't a one-off, but a catalyst for broader reforms. At the police station, morale was mixed. Some officers, disturbed by Garrity's downfall, saw the writing on the wall: "Get your policing right or face personal liability." Others grumbled that it was an unfair burden, cursing Harriet Carter's name. The union leadership, under pressure from rank and file, initially vowed an appeal, but lawyers advised that the discretionary ruling was legally tight. Perhaps the union might quietly let Garrity fend for himself. Public sentiment was not on his side. Garrity, for his part, sank into bitterness. Forced to take administrative leave pending an internal investigation, he faced a bleak future. No easy route to redemption if the department pinned him as a scapegoat for all racial profiling controversies. He stewed at home, raging about power-hungry judges and ungrateful citizens. His repeated attempts to rally union support fell flat. They quietly distanced themselves, not wanting the entire union tainted. He typed out furious rants on social media, only to see them drown amid backlash from users citing Harriet Carter's well-grounded reasons. Lena tried to return to normal life. Her school recognized her as a figure of courage. Students, especially black teens, looked at her with admiration, finding her story a beacon of hope. She remained humble, reminding them that not everyone got a Harriet Carter in their corner. She used a portion of Garrity's personal fine to donate books on civil rights history to the school library. The rest she saved for an emergency fund. After all, who knew if Garrity's meltdown might lead to new threats? Amid the swirl, Emma Martin, a local activist, sought to harness the momentum. She invited Lena to speak at a community forum on policing. Lena was hesitant. She wasn't a seasoned speaker, but Emma convinced her that a teacher's perspective could unify hearts. On a Wednesday evening, Lena found herself on stage at a packed community center, flanked by Emma and other activists. She recounted her story of being cited by a cop for no reason, the dread of facing court alone, and how Harriet Carter's verdict restored her faith in the system. The audience applauded, some wiping tears, recognizing their own struggles in her journey. Emma's speech hammered home the point. If an everyday teacher can stand up to a policeman's unfair charge, and if a judge can break tradition to deliver justice, then change is possible. As coverage of that forum spread, more people came forward with experiences of minor, questionable citations from other officers. Emma's group compiled them into a public database, pressing City Hall to review patterns. A local council member championed the cause, referencing the Carter precedent as impetus for reform. "We can't rely on each judge to handle every complaint. There must be system-wide accountability," he declared. At the same time, national interest stirred. CNN, MSNBC, and other outlets ran segments about Harriet Carter's bold stance, featuring legal analysts who marveled at her personal fine against Garrity. Some hailed it as the future of real accountability. Others worried about potential friction between judiciary and law enforcement. But the consensus was that it forced a serious conversation. If cops might face personal costs for baseless arrests, would it curb abuses? Through it all, Harriet Carter remained largely silent, continuing her docket. But attorneys in her courtroom, seeing the Garrity fiasco, stepped more carefully, aware that Carter was no pushover. Quietly, she presided over typical civil suits and criminal cases. Yet the city never forgot that behind her measured demeanor lay a billionaire judge unafraid to crack open institutional norms. One day, Lena received a letter from Harriet Carter's office, just a brief note, typed on official stationery. "Ms. Price, I commend your poise and courage. May you continue your work, shaping young minds, free from intimidation. Justice must be accessible to all, not only those with power. I hope this outcome emboldens others to seek fairness without fear. Sincerely, H.I. Carter." The simple gesture moved Lena to tears. She framed the note, placing it in her small living room. Despite the positivity, challenges lingered. Garrity's supporters painted him as a victim of PC culture. Certain fringe groups harassed Lena online. She tried to ignore them, leaning on her newly found supporters and Emma's network. Meanwhile, Harriet Carter's philanthropic expansions stoked rumors about a bigger push for policing reform. Some speculated she might fund a statewide coalition to replicate this approach, ensuring no Garrity could ever again terrorize a vulnerable citizen. In these swirling changes, one truth remained. Garrity's mocking arrogance in that courtroom had led to a downfall no one expected. The man who once sneered at Lena, confident in the uniform's invulnerability, now found himself tarnished, out of favor, and facing official scrutiny. Hard karma indeed. For the city, it was a clarion call that the winds of justice might blow in surprising ways, especially when guided by a quiet but formidable billionaire judge. While many celebrated the new accountability wave, not everyone embraced it kindly. At the police precinct, rumblings of resentment rose. A few old guard officers claimed Harriet Carter had overstepped her bounds. Some whispered that cops would be less proactive if they risked personal liability. The union, after distancing from Garrity, now wrestled with a broader tension: how to adapt to a city that demanded transparency. Public polls showed a surge in distrust for the union's old tactics of shielding officers from discipline. Harriet Carter, forging on with her judicial duties, found her cases subjected to more intense scrutiny by the union's watchful eyes. She suspected some might attempt to find a chink in her armor, a decision they could spin as bias or overreach. The judge remained meticulous, ignoring attempts at intimidation. She had wealth enough to remain unbribable, fortitude enough to remain unshaken. In Lena Price's world, the aftermath felt both empowering and unsettling. Some news outlets sensationalized her story, labeling her a hero teacher or the woman who brought down a cop. She disliked such hyperbole. She only wanted a safe, respectful city for everyone. Meanwhile, Emma Martin invited Lena to more forums, bridging communities across neighborhoods. They recognized the momentum. If they championed police accountability only to watch it fade after the Garrity fiasco, the opportunity would be wasted. Yet negativity persisted. Late one afternoon, Lena returned home to find hateful notes slipped under her door. "You ruined a good man's life," read one, scrawled in angry letters. Another threatened, "We know where you teach. Watch yourself." Shivering, she called Emma, who urged her to file a police report. Ironically, she dreaded dealing with the same system that once targeted her. But Emma accompanied her, ensuring the complaint was logged. The officer on duty, calmer than Garrity, took it seriously. So at least some in the force recognized the gravity of intimidation. Word of these threats reached Harriet Carter, courtesy of Emma, who quietly sent an update. Carter felt a surge of protectiveness. though she was a judge, not a guardian. She wrote a second note to Lena, offering a few personal security contacts, urging vigilance. The letter concluded, "Your safety is paramount. Don't let fear steal your hard-won justice." To fortify her cause, Emma arranged a citywide rally called Stand for Lena, Stand for All. Thousands gathered at a downtown park, brandishing signs proclaiming "Enough is enough" and "No more Garrities." Politicians gave speeches, but the highlight was an emotional address by Lena herself, who stood trembling at the mic. She recounted her journey from a random coffee shop encounter to a life-altering verdict. The crowd roared support, chanting her name. For the first time, she believed a wave of solidarity might overshadow the hate. Meanwhile, Rowan Faber, a well-known legal scholar and friend of Harriet Carter, published a scholarly article analyzing the Garrity verdict. Titled "Judicial Innovation, the Carter Doctrine on Malicious Policing," it dissected Carter's legal basis for imposing personal fines. Faber lauded it as a fresh mechanism to deter racial profiling. The piece generated academic debate, some praising it as a blueprint for progressive judges, others cautioning it could lead to overreach if abused. Harriet Carter maintained silence on the matter, letting her ruling speak for itself. The union leadership realized that their typical bully tactics backfired. Furious phone calls from outraged members continued, but the union found itself outmaneuvered by an aroused public that demanded thorough reform. City Hall, sensing the shifting tide, initiated a task force to examine complaints from the last decade, aiming to identify patterns of bias. Emma Martin's coalition pressed for seats on that task force. They cited Harriet Carter's example as impetus, claiming, "If one judge can unmask misconduct, imagine what a city can do with the same will." Amid this swirl, Officer Garrity's personal life descended into disarray. He'd spent thousands on legal fees, faced departmental discipline, and endured a damaged reputation. Old acquaintances distanced themselves, reluctant to be tarnished by association. Some rumored he might uproot from Chicago altogether, seeking a new start in another state. Meanwhile, the personal fine he owed to Lena weighed on him like a personal vendetta. He cursed Harriet Carter daily, but the city at large hailed her name in certain circles. Hard karma had indeed arrived, not just legally, but socially. As for Harriet Carter, she carried on, presiding over daily cases with her characteristic blend of fairness and quiet intelligence. She rarely referenced the Garrity fiasco, unless relevant. Yet her presence alone reminded attorneys and litigants that wealth and moral conviction could align, forging a new standard of accountability. She'd never planned to become a hero figure, but destiny had placed her there. In all corners of the city, from local high schools to police precinct break rooms, people mentioned Harriet Carter's verdict as an emblem of a new era. Some insisted it was merely a symbolic outlier. Others believed it heralded lasting change. Lena, caught in the middle, simply lived day by day, teaching her students, building her life. She found solace in the knowledge that her once powerless voice triggered an unstoppable wave, bridging everyday experiences with the gavel's authoritative blow. The final pages of her saga were yet to be written, but the city was already different than it was before that fateful day at the coffee shop. Months later, the city glowed with the tentative dawn of renewal. Under the impetus spurred by Harriet Carter's remarkable ruling, the police department launched a dedicated oversight unit. Investigations into old, unresolved complaints soared, culminating in several reopened cases. A few other officers resigned quietly, sensing they could no longer hide behind departmental inertia. Meanwhile, those who remained recognized that the climate favored genuine community engagement. They attended new training sessions, forging relationships with neighborhoods historically wary of the badge. Lena Price lived her life with more confidence. The fear that once gnawed at her after Garrity's harassment began to fade. She'd witnessed how a single stand, validated by Judge Carter, propelled real transformations. Students in her English classes peppered her with curious questions. "Miss Price, Are you a civil rights hero now?" She laughed, disclaiming any heroics. But they saw her as living proof that an ordinary citizen could challenge injustice and win. Community leaders championed Emma Martin's coalition, funneling fresh donations from Harriet Carter's philanthropic circle. Emma credited Naomi's victory for sparking donors' interest in robust police oversight. "It took a teacher and a judge to accomplish what we'd been screaming about for years," Emma mused, "but we'll take it." Together, they staged more rallies, but now with less anger and more hopeful energy, pushing new proposals, bridging dialogues with open-minded officers. As for Harriet Carter, she maintained her usual work, adjudicating a variety of civil and criminal cases. People whispered that she'd become the billionaire champion of the oppressed, though she rarely indulged that narrative. She believed justice was duty, not spectacle. Privately, she felt gratified that her stance on Garrity's case had rippled so positively across the city. She found herself reading more deeply into social equity issues, exploring legislative reforms she might quietly support. One brisk morning, Harriet Carter summoned Lena Price to her chambers for an informal meeting, unusual for a judge to do with a former defendant, but legally permissible once all appeals had cleared. Lena, nervous yet curious, arrived to find Carter's spacious office lined with books on law, economics, and philosophy. Warm sunlight poured through tall windows. Carter welcomed Lena with a gentle smile, offering tea. "I wanted to see how you're faring after all that publicity," Carter said softly. Lena sipped her tea, explaining her life had stabilized. The teacher recounted how she'd donated part of Garrity's fine to a legal defense fund, fueling more impetus for community policing solutions. Carter listened, nodding. She then expressed an earnest hope. "May you keep forging that link between public education and civic awareness. Our schools shape empathy." Before parting, Harriet Carter handed Lena a small envelope. Inside was a personal check from Carter's philanthropic trust, a scholarship fund set up in Lena's name to sponsor aspiring educators from underprivileged backgrounds. "Consider it a sign of my respect for your determination," Carter said. Lena blinked back tears, overwhelmed by the generosity and the quiet synergy they'd formed. News of the scholarship fund eventually leaked out, fueling more admiration for the judge's approach, tying legal outcomes to educational empowerment. Garrity's meltdown had ironically birthed scholarship opportunities for minority youth dreaming of teaching careers. The irony wasn't lost on Lena, who confided in Emma that life sometimes weaves hope from tragedy. Officer Garrity's fate, meanwhile, was sealed. The departmental review found multiple instances of questionable stops and charges. Stripped of rank, he resigned in disgrace, muttering about witch hunts. Some rumored he left Chicago entirely. Lena no longer feared his retaliation, though she prayed he might learn from the downfall rather than nurse hate. Hard karma had indeed taught a lesson. In the end, the city settled into a new equilibrium. Harriet Carter resumed her quiet philanthropic works, Lena Price continued teaching, Emma Martin's activism soared, and the police union tiptoed around potential powder kegs, well aware that the old days of blind immunity were fading. One final grand gesture closed Lena's chapter of turmoil, a citywide event celebrating community police collaboration, headlined by Emma and a handful of progressive officers. Harriet Carter was invited as an honored guest, though she politely declined to keep her judicial neutrality. She sent a statement praising the city's shift, reminding them that vigilance remains vital. On stage, Emma introduced Lena Price to thunderous applause. The teacher stepped to the mic, voice trembling but firm. She spoke of the day she was humiliated by a policeman, how she felt powerless until a judge recognized her humanity. "This city can be better than its past," she declared. "But it takes each of us, judges who risk bold rulings, citizens who refuse to be silent, officers who pledge real fairness, and activists who hold systems accountable. I'm living proof that hope is never out of reach." The crowd roared, Emma embraced her, tears glimmering in their eyes. The final echo of applause signaled that, though the fight for justice never ends, the city had seen what was possible when everyday courage meets the unwavering might of truth. Harriet Carter's surprising verdict had stunned an arrogant cop and awakened a city to the power of accountability. And in that awakening, Lena Price found not just personal vindication, but a calling to guide future generations toward a kinder, more equitable world. Thank you for journeying with Lena Price as she faced the unimaginable, a policeman's mocking accusations in court, and the unforeseen champion who intervened. Judge Harriet Carter, a discreet billionaire with a fierce devotion to justice, turned the legal tables on a system that often protects its own. In dismantling Officer Garrity's baseless charges, Harriet Carter ignited a broader transformation, revealing how everyday people, armed with truth and supported by moral authority, can undo deeply rooted prejudice. If Lena's story resonates with your own hopes for fairness, please like this video to show your support. Share it with friends who believe in the power of integrity and accountability, and subscribe to our channel for more stories where courage confronts bias. Your engagement matters. It amplifies these tales of ordinary citizens and unexpected allies who together spark real change. Let's keep shaping a world where no one stands alone against injustice,